Welcome to Human Experience, a podcast about life, sharing experiences, and how to make yourself feel better. Men need to talk more about their well-being, so let's make a start.
Welcome, listeners, to this week's episode of Human Experience. My name's Stuart.
And I'm Chris.
And this week, we're going to be bringing to you our first episode of this podcast. We're going to be discussing human experience, what it's about, why it's here, who it's for, and how we've got to this point. Chris and I are going to be sharing our experiences with you, talking about our journeys and relationships with mental health. We are hoping that we can create a community with this podcast and really put a platform for men to talk about mental health issues, as we both recognise that was a very difficult thing for us to do. And we're going to discuss why we've chosen the platform of a podcast to bring this to you. So over to my friend Chris. Have you got some stats to be hitting us listeners up with?
Yeah, just want to kind of like frame our sort of introduction episode and what we're kind of working against really in the kind of space of mental health and mental well-being. And we are called Human Experience, and it is mainly focused towards men. That's simply because me and Stu are men, and we want to talk about something that we both experience. But we're hoping that everyone, no matter what gender or anything like that, could get something out of this episode. But we're going to focus mainly towards men's health and men's sort of well-being. So just to put that into context then, doing some digging for some stats. So currently 1 in 5 women have reported mental health issues. These are based on some studies that have been done over the last couple of years. So that's 1 in 5 for women, and it's only 1 in 8 for men. So a bit of a disconnect there in terms of how many reported mental health issues there are across the two different genders there. But something that puts that in stark contrast is that 4 out of 5 suicides are men. So you've got more women reporting issues than men, but actually when it comes to people taking their own lives, that is actually 4 in 5 are down to men. And actually something that shocked me really when I read it was, for men under 35, the biggest cause of death is suicide, which I think is just mind-boggling really when you think about it. I don't know what you think about that, Stu.
Yeah, I think it's crazy with the those numbers that you've just given out there to us and the listeners, and that is our mission, guys, is to reduce all of this. That's what we've created this for, is to drastically decrease the volume of those numbers. That's what our mission, Chris and I, is to set out to do.
Yeah, 100%. And we'll go through what we're hoping to gain in terms of what we're going to talk about in more detail as we go through. But they're actually, the numbers are going the wrong way at the moment. So since 2018, there's been an 11% increase in the suicide rate. So it is going upwards. And really what we're trying to do here is to make it sort of a safe space for people, and especially men, to talk about the feelings before it ever gets anywhere near that sort of scenario where you're thinking about ending your own life. We want to stop that in its tracks early doors when you first start noticing that there's a bit of an issue, and we'll go through some of our own experiences with that. And one final stat there to see why it's so important that people talk about these issues is that only 28% of people who had committed suicide had actually had contact with mental health services in the 12 months prior to them doing that. So like, we're talking 3/4 really just hadn't, on the face of it, spoken to anybody about these issues, especially not the kind of medical service that you need when you get quite a sort of acute issues with your mental health. And that's shocking. We want to stop that funnel. We want to decrease it and turn it backwards. And I think it's best we say right at the offset, we're not professionals in any way, shape or form, and we don't profess to be, and there's certainly only things that professionals can help people with, and we'll always link to those resources. We're talking more general, early doors, it's just going through a bad patch in your life, or just trying to deal with certain things. We're hoping through us talking about what we've been through, what we've read about, things that have worked for us, and hopefully getting some guests on that can share some tactics about how you turn those issues around right in the early doors to sort of get your life back on track. And that's it really. Hopefully that's just framed what we're trying to work towards, and to turn those numbers around and get them going in the right direction.
Exactly, mate. And that's something that I think, certainly I can relate to is that speaking up about mental health. So, um, my journey has been one, I'd say, what am I, I'm 36 now. So definitely, certainly over the last 10 years, mental health were a big factor for me. Something in my 20s that I didn't really give much attention to. So what I mean by that is I'd always suffer with anxiety, usually fresh after a big night out. But I'd always have a reason to think to myself, oh, well, I've just drunk a skinful of ale. I've had very little sleep. Of course, I'm going to feel like this. Other times throughout my journey, I'd have anxiety around situations in my life. So if career choices had been poor, relationships were going down the toilet. So again, I could always walk back to a root cause of why I was feeling that way. I guess the main time when it really hit home was roughly just over a year ago now. Everything were going great for me. Work were brilliant. Family, two beautiful kids, beautiful wife, live in a very nice area. Yet I was still suffering with anxiety. This was something that I internalized for quite a while because I didn't want to make people think that I was being weak, silly. On the outset, people would look at me and go, "But what have you got to be feeling like that about? Everything's going great for you." But still, that didn't take away those thoughts and that feeling. Um, so it was a big step, which I recognise we've got listeners out there that are probably going through the same thing that is actually voicing this. Um, and that certainly was for me. The first person I actually spoke to about this was Chris. Sat down, spoke to him, and it was more like hey up, mate. So I've got this thing that I want to talk to you about. And it was quite hard, I guess, for me to open up and admit. But once I did, the weight that were like lifted off my shoulders the second I got a response of, "Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about," and in those moments, you just feel like, or I certainly felt, I was just so alone and trapped that I didn't know which way to turn. But as soon as I started talking about it, the weight were lifted, and that sort of were a catalyst to the Human Experience podcast, where Chris and I, after countless conversations from that first one, have got to this point because we recognise that if certainly for me, if I've sat on that for the best part of 10 years and it's took it to go to, and it was a very drastic um, time in my life where it went from naught to zero, from 0 to 100 in a day or two. And I just couldn't put my finger on why. But once we got to speaking about it, that was a massive weight off, and that then gave me confidence to actually share it with other people. So speak to my wife, friends, family, seek out medical professional advice. So in my experience, I did go have a few counselling sessions, and they were in a group environment, which one wasn't really doing it for me. Like I just wanted a bit more of like a Stuart. This is what you have. There you go, solved, problem solved. But unfortunately, mental health doesn't work like that. So as we're going through my journey, I've done research. I've spoke to Chris, and we've shared different authors who are experts on mental health, anxiety, depression, which throughout this journey we'll be sharing with you and avenues that you can research to hopefully help you feel better. Um, Another point I just want to touch on is like the type of anxiety that I certainly went through. So I guess in the initial stages, it was all around health anxiety. So like I explained, I'd be out on a night out. All of a sudden, I feel like I was giving myself a heart attack or something like that to booze too much. I had a little sleep or getting chest pains. All a symptom of anxiety. From then, I guess the worst thing that I ever felt was depersonalization, where it would just like I wasn't even in the room, even in my body. It's like it was an out of body experience, which is very hard to explain, even to myself. Never mind you listeners and to other people that have asked me this question. But that's something that I hope we can sort of discover on our journey throughout this. things that I want to share with you as well is what were my road to recovery. So I know Chris will speak about his journey shortly, but high level things that I found really helped me were sort of refocusing on things I enjoyed. So I started doing a lot more strict exercise routine. Um, I've tried to clean up my diet, make sure that I'm getting plenty of sleep, and really working on some good foundational habits. Again, which is topics that I'll share with you. I'll share how I've done that, when I've hit stumbling blocks, and what I did to overcome them. This is a journey that we're learning on as well as we're going through this podcast with you. But like Chris has said, we're not experts. We're just two guys that hopefully can make a difference for the better, for people out there just like us. So I guess that's sort of a really high level rundown of my journey with mental health. As we go through these weeks and hopefully months and years, listening to this podcast, me and Chris working on it, I'll be delving into these points a lot more deeper. And as we go through this episode, I hope we can touch on a few more of these points in more detail.
Yeah, thanks for that, Stu. Thanks for sharing that. I've heard it all before, but I think it's important to kind of show our background in dealing with this ourselves, because I'd class me and you two just normal guys, just working class, normal sort of childhood, whatever that means, but you can kind of get the picture. But yeah, we've spoken to each other about this. If we've both encountered these issues, then how many thousands and millions of other people out there have encountered them as well? So thanks for sharing, Stu.
And that's it. I think me and you were the typical northern lad experience: football, rugby, friends at school, got jobs pretty much.
Out boozing every weekend when we were growing up and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think myself very lucky for the life that I've had up to this point, and I guess that made it even more harder to say you've got some form of mental health, because I'm like, what do I have to be worried, anxious, stressed about? Like, everything is great. I like I say, I count myself as a very, very lucky person. But that then has a knock-on effect when you've got them intrusive thoughts, the anxieties, that sort of spirals it, because you're like looking for something then that might not be there.
Yeah, you start getting anxiety that you're getting anxiety that you're getting anxiety. It's just like you're sort of drowning in it when it gets too much for you. Like that's it is, yeah. And just to give you a bit of background, I've had a few sort of run-ins with it as well. Like, mental health is something that we've all got all the time. That's why it's called mental health, you've got to try and keep it healthy and deal with it. But we're all going to run into day-to-day sort of anxieties, like, am I going to be late for the train? We've got a big meeting at work, all that type of stuff. So it is normal. It's just keeping it in check. But there's sort of two main points that have, in my life, where I've encountered it. So going back, probably, what am I now, 35 now? So going back to probably about 10 years, maybe a bit more, just started out of nowhere, really getting like intrusive thoughts. And what do we mean by that? So that's like stuff that's sort of projected into your mind, a thought that you don't know where it's come from. And sometimes it could be quite disturbing, like really violent thoughts, or just like totally inappropriate thoughts, stuff like that. And that I started losing it a bit, thinking where are these thoughts coming from? Why am I thinking like that? And that sparked off a load of anxiety as well. And I honestly felt like I was losing my marbles it lasted a couple of weeks before I brought the courage up to talk about it to my friends and just really put it in perspective and move on from that. But yeah, it was a scary time. And for those that are listening that are old enough to remember, there was a big campaign around about the time called Speak to Frank about mental health. It was on the TV advert, and it had a number on there. And I honestly, it got to the point where I called that number because I was like, I need to speak to somebody about it. And what was disappointing at the time, really, and I'm sure things have moved on a long way since then, is it just put you through to a directory, and the person was like, "Oh, I actually can't help you, but I can book you an appointment with somebody local next week." And I was just remember saying, I was like, "I need to talk to somebody right now." I think it was like 10 o'clock at night or something. I was like, "I need to talk to somebody right now," and they were just like, "I just can't help you." And luckily, I was able to bring myself out of it and whatnot. But that was just showing that the support just wasn't there when I needed it right there and then. And hopefully in some small way these podcasts can be there for you. If you need to just hear somebody else talking about stuff that you've been through, hopefully we can play a bit of a part in that. So then moving on, and the point in time more recently where I've encountered it is coming up to 2 years ago now, and this directly linked it into our conversation, Stu, when you told me about your issues. This is why I was straight away like, I know exactly what you're going through, because I'd probably about 6 months prior to that I'd just come through it myself, but mine was definitely more around health anxiety. So I'd heard a story about somebody that was similar sort of age to me had a heart attack just out of nowhere. And that really shook me up. I was just like, whoa, uh, we're only quite young generally, also relative to where you can get to in your life. And I just thought, if it's happened to that person out of the blue, it could happen to me. And that's when I started, every little twinge, every little pain, every like sort of skipped heartbeat or anything like that, I was just convinced that I was going to have a heart attack. And for those that have experienced a panic attack or whatnot, that does feel probably a lot like a heart attack. You start getting short breath, lots of shooting pains in your chest.
Yeah.
And it just happened at the worst time. I was on holiday with my wife in Dubrovnik, and it happened day one, like really bad. It kind of came to a head then, and I just spoiled that whole first day. Like I just went into a shell, and I just like I didn't even want to talk about it to my wife. Eventually, I did tell her what was going on because she was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And through that, I found a book called Dare, which we're going to talk about. That just really turned the corner for me. It was really quick, helpful advice, and it just really helped me turn the corner. And within like a few days, I talked myself out of it, and I've not looked back since really. So that when you came to me, Stu, and you're like, right, and you were almost, I wouldn't say you were embarrassed to say it, but you're a bit like sheepish about like, look, it's got to a point, Chris, I'm going to have to talk to me about it, and I'm going to talk to you about it. And straight away, I was just like, mate, that is such a normal thing to be going through. I can point you in the direction of what you need to read and what you need to do about that. And within a few days, you just totally turned 180 and you were back on track straight away, weren't you?
Yeah, it was very much night and day. Once I felt like I want alone, I'd got it out of my head, so it was out there to people that I care about, and people care about me. And I actually, we just touched on a book there called Dare. It's a fantastic book. If I were going to give anyone step one advice for support with anxiety, mental health issues, it would be to read that book. It's a book by the author, I believe, is called Barry McDonough, an Irish fella. Honestly, as soon as Chris recommended that to me, I got it pretty much straight away. Read the book, and it was just an instant 180 for me. It just ticked all the boxes as to make sense as to what I was going through. And I guess that one of the scary things that I couldn't put my finger on what it was, why it was, and
Yeah.
how I was going to get by that. I couldn't honestly see how this feeling was ever going to go. I couldn't remember what it was like prior. And no matter how much, I spoke to friends and my wife, and they try and remind me of that this is just a blip a little bit in time. In that moment, that just, I couldn't imagine that. But step one for me was reading that book, and that's the first bit of advice I would give to anyone that ever opens up to me about this.
Yeah, the full title of the book, if you're interested, is Dare, and the subtitle is The New Way to End Anxiety and Stop Panic Attacks. And that was exactly, I was literally in the middle of one of those when I just went on Amazon and just like searched for anxiety, and that jumped up and it looked like a good book and had good reviews. So yeah, first-hand experience from both me and Stu on that. And I'm sure we'll delve into some of the advice over future episodes on that.
Yeah.
And really, kind of apart from, just to kind of wrap up my sort of intro into myself, apart from having lived this and being shocked by the stats and seeing people that I really care about's life crumble because they've just let mental health get out of control, I've just got a genuine interest in life and the human condition and what it means to be us. Who are we? Where have we come from? Why we're
Totally.
here? And sometimes those questions have driven me like really around the bend over the years in terms of why don't we know that? Is there a point to life? All that kind of stuff, which is quite deep philosophical questions. But I genuinely, the best sort of analogy I've ever, I can't even remember where I've read this or whether I came up for it. I'm going to take credit unless somebody out there can correct me and it is somebody else's, which I'm sure it is. Life is kind of like getting a Christmas present, getting the most complicated piece of machinery for Christmas, and it being in different parts, and somebody saying, right, you've got to put it together and figure out how to use it, but we're not going to give you any instruction manual at all. That's pretty much how you come into this world. Yes, people help you along the way, like you go to school, you learn life lessons from other people, but that's been trial and error over the whole of human existence to get to a point today where we do have more guidance on how you can live a better life and all that, and we're still learning day by day, and
Yeah.
we're hoping this podcast fits into that category. Like even if you take one bit of nugget, actionable advice, or you can pass on to somebody else, then our job here is done. And if one other person's life gets better because of listening to what we're talking about here, then we can give ourselves a pat on the back. Hopefully we can reach more than that, but that's what we're here for. Hopefully it benefits people. So yeah, I've got genuine interest in that side of it. I've lived through this sort of shit myself. So have you. So we've turned the corner and we're on a good track, so it can be done. And I also don't want to downplay. There's obviously different scales of this stuff. I wouldn't say, and I think you'd agree, Stu, we weren't in a really, really terrible mental health situation. It hadn't got to a
I'd
point where
agree
we
with
needed
that.
medication or anything like that. And for anything like that, please see your GP and obviously use professional resources. But day to day, sort of living your life, especially as a guy, there's stuff we can talk about before it gets to that, and hopefully get better through our own efforts and as a community.
Couldn't agree more, mate. And and I think just to touch on before I go on to our next topic, just to touch on that, like Chris and I do have. So the human experience, the core of it is to help men suffering with mental health. That's the mission statement that we've got. But throughout this journey, we're going to throw in a couple of hot potato topics that could be very relevant in media outlets or thought-provoking conversations around social media and things like that. So, the ultimately the elements that we will always walk back to is supporting people and creating a community where we can support each other through mental health issues. But we maybe like to have a little bit of fun and then hopefully get some thought-provoking topics as well. So, why a podcast? Chris and I started off conversations around these topics. We'll give you a high level as what brought us on that journey, but then why a podcast? Why did we choose a podcast to get our story out there? Well, for me, it sort of started through looking at YouTube and trying to find source material on there. And there is a lot of good stuff on YouTube, but there were certain things where I was looking for information and whether it be I wanted to get an exercise program to really start to build my recovery. And every exercise program went onto a people that were wanting to become bodybuilders or like super genetically gifted people. And I'm a father of full-time working dad, father of two, married man who had very limited time. So that was one aspect. I thought, well, if there's people out there who I want to help and support on this journey, then put out content that I were looking for, which is what I want to do. Chris and I also, we want to create a community place. So Chris were talking in his high level rundown of his journey, about us sharing with you guys, helping, supporting you. If we can help one person, we'll be chuffed to bits. But it's a two-way street, and we're open for you guys to use this as a platform to get your stories across, for you guys to share with us ways that we can help improve ourselves. Or if you guys have found real success on a road to recovery and it's not something that we're talking about, that could be because we've just not experienced it. So please share that with us and we'll get it out there to the listeners, because the more help that's coming out, the better for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I watch a lot of I listen to a lot of podcasts. Like they're just such a useful thing. You can download them on your phone, or when we're going to work and stuff like that, you can listen to it on your train ride or in your car, or whatnot. So it's just a good format, I think, and I've got a lot of benefit out of listening to many different podcasts along the way. And I think right now, like let's be honest, Stu, the world we're sort of living in right now, we're in the UK and across the world, we're all in lockdown from coronavirus issues, and um, we've had many a stab at getting the podcast up and running, but there's always been like an obstacle thrown in the way, hasn't there? And we keep bouncing
There
back.
has, yeah.
We're committed to it. Like it's a little hobby for us both. It helps us to talk about these things regularly, and certainly would get a lot of satisfaction out of it. Even like I've already said, even helping one person and creating a place where people feel like it's okay to talk about these things. And you know, I think once my wife listens to one of these podcasts, she'll be like, "Why do you never talk about this to me?" And that's tough. I find it
Yeah.
hard to talk about these issues, and that's might seem odd that we're putting it out there into the world, but we're committed to creating a safe place for people, and especially men, to feel like they can talk about that. So it just works on so many
Yeah.
different
And
levels.
I think that'll be a recurring theme, because I honestly believe when people listen to this and they'll come up and speak to me about it and be like, "You all right?" And it's like, yeah, I am. But there's people out there that might not be, and that's we want to share our story and our journey to help others. And I believe our catchphrase or strapline, the times we've spoken to each other, is this is the podcast we wish we had
Yeah.
when we were going through our bouts of anxiety at the time. So let's just look back at those stats, mate. I guess we went over them, but I'd like to just go down and discuss a few of the stats that you shared and just really hone in on like the seriousness of what we're talking about. I think one that really, really, really shocked me was the 4 in 5 suicides of men.
Yeah.
So when we first kicked off this podcast, Chris and I, we were trying to hit um, everybody, and everyone is, well, there could be women out there that want to listen to this that have brothers, husbands, fathers, or whatever that are also suffering with mental health. But because we're no experts, we're just talking about our experience. We really wanted to narrow it down to men who could relate to us, who could sort of say, "Yeah, I'm in their shoes. I'm wearing your shoes."
Mm-hmm.
But when I saw that stat of 4 in 5 suicides of men, that just were like that is what we need to tackle. That's like the thing for me. If we help a 1% decrease in that, then
Yeah.
I'll be happy with what we're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely, and it becomes even more stark, I think, with the other context around women are more likely to talk about the feelings and get professional help. I think,
Yeah,
this is sort of bro science on my behalf, but I think there's a less amount of men talking about mental health, but there's more men as a percentage committing suicide. That tells me that they've just a lot of people are choosing to internalize the whole thing until it gets to such a point where it's just so painful that they've chosen that route out of it. And we're
yeah,
committed to creating a safer route out of it where you can get your life back on track and do something good with it.
yeah, definitely. So, I mean, Chris, listen, this could be someone's first point of call. This podcast, they've looked on, they've found this, they've done the research. What would you say then for your first sort of journey with this, or what would be your recommendations for step one to someone who's like, I ain't talked to anyone. I've clicked in YouTube or a podcast and I've just typed uh, anxiety podcast or whatever that is, and they're listening to this and they take the first step away. What would you, from your experience, recommend that be?
Step one that helped me is you are in control of your own destiny. Yeah, there's lots of stuff out there that is outside of your sphere of control, but the way you think about yourself and your own life, it's not easy always to have a positive outlook on it, but that is within your control if you find the right tools and techniques to quieten the chatter in your mind and turn it towards where you want it to go. I always liken it to like your mind is the lens through which you view the world. If you've
Yeah,
got a dirty lens or it's distorted, whatever you're looking at through that lens is going to look like that as well. So it's going to, if you've got a negative lens, anything that happens in your life is going to come across and be like an attack against you or negativity against you. So you need to focus on the most important relationship in your life, and that's the one that you've got with yourself. And there's
yeah,
loads of stuff out there that you can start using to help with that. So I think until you nail that, and just talking from my own experience, until you nail that down or you understand that, I think you'll be struggling to start taking the positive steps that you need.
Yeah.
How about you?
So I guess for me, from my experience, it's finding someone and just someone you trust, and just confiding in that individual. It's not an
Mm-hmm.
easy step, and a lot of like audio books that I'm big on audio books myself. I listen to a lot usually on my commute to and from work. And one audiobook that I was listening to, the author said one thing about suffering with mental health, and it's a sponsoring thought that they talked about, and it's you have a choice. So everything thought that you have a choice, um, as easy or hard as that may seem, whether you want to change that thought. And for me, that choice was when I had a choice of either to open my mouth to someone or to turn a corner and continue to deal with it myself. And I just can't. I just don't know where I would be if I'd have not took that leap of faith and just gone. I just need to have a
Mm-hmm.
word about something, blah, and just blurted it out.
Yeah.
And then after
Yeah.
after that, for me, it'd be dare what I've said earlier. Like I think that anyone who's found this podcast, I would, if you've not read that book, I would recommend you go pick up that book.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, like, retrospectively, you talking to me about your issue, because I'm an introvert by nature, so I always internalize stuff. That's why probably when you ask me that question, I'm like, it's all about what you do for yourself, all that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
stuff. That's just my
yeah,
natural go to. But even me, when you said that you'd gone through it, that made me look at it and go, thank God that I'm not alone as well. Even though I'd
yeah, yeah,
sort of come through the worst of it, that
yeah,
made so. I think it works right across that sort of extrovert introvert boundaries. I think we can all relate to it, and
yeah.
it does come easier the more you talk about it.
And that's interesting. I'd actually class myself as more as an extrovert, like I wear my heart on my sleeve sort of
Yeah.
guy. And I think I can't hide when something's wrong. I just can't do it. I've never been able to do it. Um, so and even for me, it was so hard to open my mouth and get it to
Yeah.
come out. Um, so if you listen to this, it's all types of men are going to struggle talking about this. But
Mm-hmm.
once you take that first step, for me personally, it was just like a massive weight, and then that gave me confidence then to speak to medical professionals, look at everything, because I had a big stigma about going to see a doctor and thinking to myself, oh, they'll just put me on tablets. I don't want to be on tablets for the rest of my life, and those were my thoughts. Like that could have been the right thing for me, but just because I'd not even talked to anyone about anything, I'd totally shut myself off from any sort of support and help at that time.
Mm-hmm. Good, but here we are. We're probably on what, the third or fourth attempt to get the podcast up and running. But
Yeah, yeah.
if you commit
Third
to
name.
something, yeah, third name, and we think we're settled now. It does what it says on the tin. Hopefully,
Yeah,
yeah. And the vision for us is just a useful tool that you can share, or that it brings you some sort of relief to your own life. And we want to engage with people. As Stu's already said, we want to create a community, and we'll be directing people to our Facebook groups, and
yeah,
any kind of review you can leave us, any kind of subscription to it, if you're getting any benefit out of it at all, it just helps get the message out there. Yeah, and
cool.
we'll get better as time goes on. So yeah, stick
Yeah,
with
yeah,
us, guys.
yeah. I mean, we've got episodes weekly planned. We'll be looking to get a weekly podcast out there, um, touching on a wide range of mental health issues. I think one of the big things that's come out of this week's episode, there might be a nice caveat into episode 2, which is talking in more detail about giving voice to your feelings. So please join us next week for us to talk about that. Hopefully, again, you'll get some out of it that will support you or someone close to you. So that concludes this week's episode. Chris and I would like to thank you for listening. Please subscribe and leave us a review to help our community grow. You'll find links to our social media and any other resources discussed in this episode in our show notes.